Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
It is also then, therefore, one of our greatest gifts. It's one of the reasons, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. Let's be 100% clear. And I think it really does tend to be a good fit for us multi-passionates who have the freedom and the flexibility and the creativity to just really let that part of us fly. So often it's about finding the sweet spot in that gift, right? I think being a multi-passionate is absolutely a gift. It's part of what makes us who we are, and it's part of what sets us apart. And that's something to work with and honor and celebrate.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life, with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today we're talking about navigating new ideas and change, something we can both crave and resist. In a past episode, we talked about change in the context of choice and how we can be challenged when it's thrust upon us, as it was during the COVID pandemic. Today, my guest, Laura Livingston, and I are approaching change from a multi-passionate creative perspective. Laura helps seasoned entrepreneurs who love what they do to create more fulfillment in their businesses. She coaches her clients through strategic decisions and pivotal business transitions to create the next iteration of their business, one that's custom designed just for them and built around a life they love. If you're listening, I'm assuming you know if you're multi-passionate or not. But if you'd like to clarify, I'll put some links to episodes in the show notes where we get more detailed about that. Today, we're focusing on that innovative idea-generating tendency that thrills us and sometimes gets us into trouble. How do we honor the desire to keep changing and growing, developing new ideas, trying new things without burning ourselves out? How do we make the best decisions that will serve us? That's what we cover in today's conversation. We talk about the challenges of change that we face specifically as multi-passionates. Then we dig into a key distinction about the visionary and execution sides of us and where decision-making works best within that. I love Laura's simple explanation of how to find the sweet spot in all this, and I know you will too. Without further ado, let's join Laura to talk about navigating new ideas and the change that comes with them. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast, Laura Livingston. I am so delighted that we are finally getting to this conversation because I know it's going to be good.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a long time coming.
It has. Before we dig into the topic of navigating change, and such a good one, I'd love it if you tell us a bit about who you are and who you help. And my favorite part of this question is, what makes you light up?
I love that question. That's my favorite part too. What lights me, I'm going to answer that first. What lights me up is experiencing new things. And most of the time for me in my personal life, that means traveling. I've moved around a lot. I currently live in Honduras, in Roatan, Honduras, on a little island in the Caribbean. And that has just sort of been the way that I light myself up in my life. What lights me up at work is working with people who are truly doing work in their genius, doing work that they deeply love, that is their gift to the world, their life's work, however you want to call that. That really, really lights me up. And so who I am and what I do and who I help, I am a coach for small business owners And specifically for small business owners who are on that journey of not just entrepreneurship, but the journey of doing your life's work, which is an added layer to the deeply personal and beautiful and challenging journey of being an entrepreneur. So I help people who love what they do, and I coach them through all kinds of business transitions and also just general life as an entrepreneur, from making changes externally in your business, like a new offer or running two businesses at once, to the inner stuff of running a team and navigating your mindset.
And I feel like there's such a delightful parallel to that journey of being an entrepreneur, of being a business owner, and also, the journey in our lives and the fact that you like to travel. So it feels fitting that you embrace change as you do and then love to support others in doing it. So let's talk about change, the concept of change. I think we all know what change is. It's like, it was like this and now it's not, and we're going someplace different here. But what is it about change that is so challenging to us, and why we would even want to listen to a conversation about navigating change? Because I'm quite sure, I know I will click the minute I'm like, ooh, change. Yeah, let's talk about that. Because I find it challenging. Why? Why do we find it so challenging?
Yeah, and I do find that people either love me or hate me when I start to talk about this topic, which is one of my favorite topics, and I do love it. But I think we also just everybody has their own sort of personality style and comfort level with change. And lots of my clients love change, and we can talk a lot about, I think this is where we're going to go today. But some people are like me, and they're like, bring it on, let's change it up and figure out the details later, like running at it. And some people are the complete opposite end of things. Like, I need a very detailed business case before I'm going to make one tiny change. And most people are somewhere in between, finding your way through that, because either direction or either end of that spectrum can both serve you and wear you out. Anything can be too much of a good thing, or too much of the way you want to do things. It's like, yes, and can we do it a little bit differently? Towards the middle, just one step towards the middle generally serves most people. And so I think that's where, no matter where you fall on the spectrum, you have different reasons for why you don't like change, or why I want to run it all, but then I don't want to actually execute it. I just want to come up with a good idea, right? And then not go. Or I don't want to do anything different, but I know that would serve me, right? So I think we all have, it sort of depends on where you fall on the spectrum and where your preferences and comfort levels are, and maybe what changes have happened to you or been created by you and through you during your life that sort of puts you on that continuum. And then, I think the reason we don't like it, or the reason we have a hard time with it, is it asks us to do something different. Not just the change process itself, but generally each change process calls something out of us that it's a personal growth opportunity to just be annoying about it. That's sometimes we don't wanna, sometimes we just don't wanna. So I think that's just the little kid in us throwing a temper tantrum and of like, I don't want to. I think sometimes it's that simple, but really.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on this, because I know there have been many times when I have said, I know this is building character, but am I not enough of a character already?
Exactly. That's enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for this one, or, the timing wasn't when I wanted it to, right? We want to control everything.
Oh, yeah. The control factor. That's a good one. And also the point that you brought up, let's highlight it right off the bat here. It's what we talk about all the time here, knowing ourselves. And we all have different needs. We have different experiences that have definitely impacted how we can manage, how resilient we are. And then everything that you were describing feels a lot like when we decide we're going to change something. But as we talked about with Nicole Mixdorf on the show, we also are sometimes dealing with change that is someone else's idea that is thrust upon us. And either way, I think it's really interesting to think that whether it's our idea or not, we might have different levels of challenge. But I think too, when we are entrepreneurs, when we are especially multi-passionates, we probably bring on more of the change than we realize. So it's kind of like, well, great. So I did this to myself. And that was a big part of why I wanted to talk with you about this today. Let's dig into that side of it. We've brought it upon ourselves because why? What are our tendencies, especially as multi-passionate creatives, as entrepreneurs? How do we let it serve us as opposed to hindering us, I guess, if you will?
Yeah. And I do really love this. I mean, I think I'm all for the other side of change, which like when it happens, kind of comes upon you, happens to you, if you want to look at it that way. But I think, like you said, so many entrepreneurs are really like in the business, honestly, of change and innovation and like creating something in the world that didn't exist before in exactly this way. And I think that's why entrepreneurship attracts so many of us multi-passionates. I'm also a multi-passionate, like forever and ever, have always been. It is also then, therefore, one of our greatest gifts. It's one of the reasons, I mean, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. Let's be 100% clear. And I think it really does tend to be a good fit for us multi-passionates who have the freedom and the flexibility and the creativity to just really let that part of us fly. So often it's about finding the sweet spot in that gift, right? I think being a multi-passionate is absolutely a gift. It's part of what makes us who we are, and it's part of what sets us apart. And that's something to work with and honor and celebrate. And so many of my clients are running more than one business, or kind of running more than one business, technically under one business model. And that feeds them and that gives them the motivation. And they will not be happy. They never would be happy in a 33-year career doing the exact same thing. That's just not for them. That's for some people, but that's not for them. And so I think just really owning that part of entrepreneurship of like, I just get to run at stuff and create stuff. And we can talk about like ways to do it where you don't also wear yourself out and sort of the other side. There's always the other side and the trade-offs of how we approach it. But if you naturally approach change in a similar way than to me and you, I think, Lisa, you're willing to run at it and go for it. I think the world and society often tells us that that's not how you do it. You need to be, smart and rational and reasonable and make a plan. And I'm actually fans of all of those things. And not when you're in the visionary mindset, right? Not when you're dreaming. When it's time to execute that dream and that vision, then we can, start looking at the other side. But I think letting yourself run with that and giving yourself permission and celebrating that part of who you are, because it is who you are and it is part of your gift. I think you can't do that enough, honestly.
Well, I like hearing that. And I like the words that you were using. One of my favorites, which really is reminiscent of gratitude to me, is that phrase, I get to. And then I also love how you're talking about owning this idea, putting up a boundary there and being like, I'm not listening to you. And this is the world, right, at large, that coming at us with this whole, aren't you going to pick something already? Pick something and run with it. You're doing something new again now? Yeah. And that's amazing because, listen, principles of agile management, thank you very much, continuous
Yes.
improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I see this as our minds naturally inclined toward continuous improvement. How can we make it better? And I know from a productivity standpoint, I'm constantly talking about that and thinking about that. And that is continued efficiency. It's also following that passion, like you said. So the sweet spot of what do you love and how do you continue to follow that and honor that? That's going to make you more productive. It is going to energize you. That's energy management, as I like to call it,
Yes.
where you're doing those things that you love. So that is such a brilliant place to start because we do need to say, I have this idea. I do need to follow that path. I do need to explore it. Now, how we follow that path, whether we let it be a bright, shiny object or how far we follow it down, that sort of thing, I think that's where we can potentially get in the weeds or not. So let's go there next. So it's like, let it serve you by honoring the fact that you have these ideas, you have thoughts of change, you have things that are inspiring you, things that you want to add, whatever is going on. How do we go about making the best decisions? I think that's always a question for multi-passionates. I can envision it right now. And I know we've all had this, right? You're like, am I burning it down? Like it's trash. I'm trash. Everything's trash. It's all got to go. Or maybe it's just a minor adjustment. And, is it like a full rebrand and I'm a new person now? You don't even know me. Don't call me by my old name. Or is it like, like a soft rebrand where like I slightly modified the colors? Like what's happening there? How do we balance that? How do we make those choices so that, we're not spinning our wheels, burning ourselves out?
Well, that is my love. That is part of my life's work. Very big questions and
Yes.
love it. I could talk all day about this. I think a couple of things rise to the top for me in terms of how we think about it and how we go about making some changes within our ways of changing. And I think some of it is recognizing really and truly what's happening in the moment, because I do talk to my clients a lot about decision making, and I've actually played around with changing my title to decision coach because that's 90% of my job. And knowing where you are in the process and kind of just what's happening right now and naming it is really important. So for example, and way oversimplifying this process is like, am I in dreaming visionary mode right now? For me, this happens when I'm in the shower. This happens when I'm on my front porch every morning journaling and drinking my coffee and just looking at the world. Am I in dreaming visionary mode? That means it is not time to make a decision about whether or when I'm going to implement said beautiful, brilliant idea, right? I'm just in that zone. And that's where a lot of us really thrive. And so not to make that wrong. And if you're not, by the way, side note, if you're not giving yourself time and space on a daily, weekly basis to be in that planet, because I feel like it's kind of another planet, it's your own little precious planet, then you're doing this genius part of yourself a disservice because you're not letting it really go. This is actually your moneymaker, whether you see it or not. And it's also your, competitive advantage and your deep levels of fulfillment, which I always strive to talk about with my clients. And so knowing what mode you're in, right? So, okay, I'm in sit on my porch, dream mode, journaling. I have some really cool ideas. I'm going to let myself run with that. It's not time to decide. It's not time to execute. It's not time to do anything practical and like earthly with this. It's just head in the clouds, let yourself go there. And then it's also when it stays with you for a little while, or you start to go, now that I have this great idea, I actually have 14 ideas about how I could execute it, right? And how I could bring it into practice and what that might tangibly, practically look like. Then it's recognizing that you're in a space of, okay, now I'm sort of in a pre-decision making process or in a decision-making process of what we used to say in corporate. I used to work on big change projects in big companies. And there was always a moment right before you officially like flip the switch, whether it was technology or you're running something, there was always a go, no go decision of like, we've been planning for this for a year, but we're going to go, no go decision, which really doesn't mean, are we going to do it? We know we're going to do it. We have the money, we have the funding, we have all the decisions already made, and we've been working on this. But the go, no go is kind of like, is now the right moment? Are we really ready to flip the switch this week like we planned? Or do we have some things going on that we really need to give ourselves 2 more weeks so that we don't flop? And so that go, no go, I like to use is just like, and it doesn't need to be so pressurized, right? But like, am I really in a space where this is a good time to start deciding when and how to implement this? And then we go into the how, because the how gets in the way of the dreaming and the visionary, and the practical gets in the way of the dreaming and the visionary. And most multi-passionates are really good at, and I'm way oversimplifying, or maybe stereotyping, you can tell me, but I think a lot of us are really good in the dreaming phase and not as good in the implementation phase. And so knowing that, it's got to be big and drawing enough for us to actually bring it down to earth and execute so we can stay motivated and actually follow through with something. All that is to say, just to recap where I'm going, is like, some of it is just knowing where you are in the process. Like, just because you have a big idea doesn't mean you need to sit down and decide whether or not to implement it and how. Sometimes it's just more fun to stay in that big idea space. And sometimes that's all your brain needs. You don't need to start 14 new businesses. What you need is to just give your brain that creative outlet. And then you can like actually get back to the work and the job that you had planned for yourself today.
Yeah, this sounds so familiar to the work that I do, because many times I'm working with a client and we just process through all these big ideas and then shift into that realistically. What do you have the bandwidth for? What's going to happen next? And what could you do right now if you were to explore that? Or maybe what kind of research could you do a little bit more? Now you're starting to bring it into that next execution area. And I love that you made that distinction. I think that's such an important point, that we have this sort of visionary dreaming side and the execution, the how of it. Also, to that point, you mentioned this, I want to bring it back around because it's so important that when we overly concern ourselves with the how, that is what gets in the way of us creating as it is. And so we can get stuck on that. And I hear that so many times where it's like, well, I wouldn't know how. No, we're not going there yet.
Yep.
First, we're designing, we're dreaming, we're thinking about that. So that can happen in places where I may be working with someone who's a creative visionary in terms of the kind of business that they're going to have, but they're struggling to think, well, how do I do all of that and have that be successful and balance time with my family and do this and have my ideal day? Like, how does that even work? The how is what we get to.
Yeah.
First, we touch upon what matters to you. So as I understand what you're describing, it's allowing yourself that time. And it sounds like a great takeaway. One thing to do today is carve out just a little bit of time, even like each week, just a little bit, where you can sit and have this sort of free for all visionary time. No rules. The first rule of Visionary Club is we don't talk about Visionary Club. No, it's just like, just go for the dreaming and the what ifs, right? I love that phrase, what if. You do nothing with it. And so that helps because you won't get caught up in the how or that it matters. It's sort of like playtime for creatives, right?
100%.
So start with that. And when something comes up, let's say, and I think that's really what happens. Ooh, I have this great idea. I'd love to do this thing. Then fine, let it flow, or write it down for that visionary time and be like, ooh, what would that look like? What if I did this, and just sort of play. Then you can shift in with something into more of that how mode. And it sounded to me when you were describing, am I really in a space where I could explore something like this, or I really actually want to? That would be a question. And the other one that you said, and I'd love to go there next so we can explore a bit more of that decision making, that how part of it. You said when it stays with you. And I thought that was a really interesting point. So let's say we do have all this, ooh, bright shiny objects, right? Really great ideas. Ooh, wouldn't that be cool? Is that part of the decision making right there? If it stays with you, if it's not letting you go, then there's something to it.
Absolutely. I have so much to say on this. Yes. Big fat yes. And I think really separating out even within the like visionary process and the how process, I feel like there is that the decision is the in between, right? So it's visionary playtime. Then is this something I want to do? Really, like do anything with other than leave it in my journal. And I have, by the way, tiny side note, I always recommend that my clients have a back burner list where they can say, I really love this idea. I've already very quickly made the decision. This is not a thing I'm going to do right now, but I don't want to lose it. And I think sometimes we need to let ourselves commit to it in some way, shape, or form so that we can close that thought process out and feel like we're honoring the beautiful big idea that we have. And so I love to say, great, put it on the back burner list. Those are things that you would like to do someday, and you will decide when and if they ever need to go. And then it sort of like gives it credit and credibility, and then we can close it and move on. But I think that point about, am I really going to do this? I mean, sometimes I'll stay with clients in that for weeks or months, because if the do this thing is really big, like we have some decisions and trade-offs to do, and the how is really important. Like, what are we taking off our plate so that we can do this? Most of my clients are full in one way, shape, or form in their work. And so I think back to your question though about the decision, the thing I always come back to with my clients, and I ask it in different ways, but it's like, yes, we're serving the world, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but what do you get out of this? What's the why for you? Will this bring you a deep sense of fulfillment in your work? And if the answer is yes, one of the little clues of how you know is what you said. it stays with you. Because I believe, I used to be a hypnotherapist when I very, very, very first left corporate. And what we learned in hypnotherapy and sort of understanding the subconscious mind is sort of this idea that like we already have all the answers inside us. And it's just about listening, to way oversimplify. It's just about listening to ourselves. And so it's like, if you start asking yourself the question in the decision making phase, what would I get out of it? Why would this be fun for me? Where could I feel deeply fulfilled providing this service, product, whatever? And how does this light me up? If it stays with you, that's one of the ways that you know it's like your soul is speaking to you. There's something here. Versus sometimes I'll be in this decision making phase with a client and we'll kind of realize when we start asking the questions underneath and diving into like, why are we even coming up with this idea? Why would we go forward with it? And it's like, well, I think this is one way I could just make money. Okay, I'm all about monetizing anything and everything. But if you're just doing this only because you think this is a quicker, easier way to make money and it's not also going to light you up, then let's go back to the drawing board because there's lots of ways to do that piece of it. And so almost like you're trying to solve the how, like, how can I monetize this? And it's like, yeah, let's go back to the beginning and make decisions based on our sense of fulfillment, how we can impact the world. And for me, I think it really has to be in that order. Me first. Sorry, not sorry. I want to be lit up. And then me being lit up in my work enables me to impact the world in the best, most beautiful way that I can. And then I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the customer and the client and what service I'm providing, and then the how. And that includes the profitability piece of it. And so in that decision-making phase, what's the why in the decision? Because anything is a good business idea, but is this a good business idea for you? Is this a good idea for your fulfillment, for what you want to build and create next? Because that feels fun and interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the parallels to what I teach in productivity, looking at basic habits or whatever, you can do habits for habit's sake, or someone says, hey, this is a good
Yes.
idea. Just like you can monetize something and you can take the steps. But if your heart's not in it, if you don't understand why you're doing it, if you don't have that driver that creates longevity, right? That creates sustainability, that helps you push through the challenging times. You know, like I said, you could have the best system in the world, but if it doesn't align with what you truly value, or if it's in direct conflict with something that you value, it's not going to happen. Doesn't matter how good those habits are. Doesn't matter how good that system is. It's not going to work. So it's interesting. I do think we spend a lot of time in the how, like, well, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And it's not that you don't want to spend time there, and you do eventually need to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you are like spinning your wheels, and I've seen that a lot with decision making, right? Where you're like, I could do this, I could do this. And I've often said to my clients, you're trying to make a decision without sufficient data. So you're going to burn yourself out by doing that. Let's back up. And what you're saying is let's back up into the why. And so, yeah, if the reason behind it is I need to monetize more, and that's a very real thing. So let's make it a thing like that's okay. Need to make more money is great. We just want to make sure that it's connected and in alignment with what lights us up, because that keeps the fires burning. But I could totally see going back to, and this is a very, productivity side of things, going back to what you're already doing. Don't reinvent the wheel. And how can you expand or adjust upon that? And I think that touches upon this idea that change doesn't always have to be huge to be effective.
Yes. And I find that is like the secret that happens sort of behind the scenes in my work, where it starts with, Laura, I have this really great business idea. I think it's going to be a second business, and blah, blah, blah. We all go there. Like I love this phase of it. And then when we do the what's behind it, we drill down in the why, we realize like, oh, the real juice in that for both you and the world and who you serve, the juice in that is actually just a tiny variation on what you're already doing. So let's, as you said, let's go back to what you already offer and create the essence of that beautiful idea in what you're already doing. And then what I love about that too, beautiful side benefit, is you get there faster. Yes, you could go out and start a whole new business. And I'm all about that too when that's the right decision. But you also, so often, it's like finding those creative actions to just get what you really wanted out of that idea now, because you already have a business, you already have a foundation, and it's easier to just add a little tweak or add a variation on an offer than to recreate the wheel. And seeing that you've already built that because you built something that you already love, you've built something that already lights you up. So it sort of actually logically makes sense that a lot of what you're going to find interesting still comes back down to what you're already doing or some version of what you're already doing.
Yeah. And asking these questions in the way that you're describing, I think can also be a great way for us to kind of do our own audit or reconcile things a little bit. Because if we go back and we're like, well, let's go back to what I'm already doing. Oh, it's not, wait, why am I doing this? You may find there could be some changes in what you're currently doing that bring about that satisfaction enough. Because I do find that when we fall into the busy trap, especially as creatives, and we're getting all these ideas, sometimes it's, I don't want to say like a trauma response, but sometimes it's a response to an unmet need.
100%.
So asking yourself why, asking yourself, are you tapping into what you need? Again, that goes back to that reflection that you talked about of recognizing what's happening and, where you are in the process. I love that. I think that's a beautiful collection of questions and perspectives on how we can kind of assess where we want to go with this change and what's happening, and always going back to really you. How does it light you up? Doing that, that's how it best serves you. Is there anything else about this? Any final thoughts that you want to share on this?
I think the way that I look at change, just sort of my former consulting career, because this is just the extension of that in small businesses, I think one of the things that I like to recommend when you're in some sort of, whether it's a big change process or something as simple that happens every day in entrepreneurship of like, oh, I have this idea, should I be doing this? Is like, be really open to where this takes you, because everything is a breadcrumb, and everything that you think might be big may actually just need to be executed in a small way, like we just talked about. And sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes you start to feel something's not working, lighting you up the way it used to. And you think it's just a tiny, maybe if I just tweak my offer, maybe if I just do this, and you realize that actually, no, like you really are moving into a bigger space of change, and it is time to really make a shift. And so just being really open, not to scare you, but I think, being really open to just where the change comes from and what the sort of answer is, or the end result of the change is often not what you think it's going to be when you start to feel those nudges of like, something's got to change. And just being really open to that, I think, gets you through the messy middle part of transition much faster and helps you sort of see what's really happening, as opposed to the messy mind that, that it can feel like when you just can't see the forest for the trees.
Absolutely. Okay. I love that. That's a beautiful place to wrap up. And it's reminiscent of so many conversations we've had on the podcast with the idea of staying curious. It leaves the judgment at the door and it allows you to explore. Love that, Laura. Okay. So before we get into the rapid wrap up, that's easy for me to say, where can we find you online?
You can find me at Laura Livingston Coaching on Instagram and LinkedIn, and lauralivingston.co is my website.
Okay, make sure to have all that in the show notes. Now, you ready for this rapid wrap up?
I'm ready.
Okay, you fill in the blanks for me, please. A song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance.
It's called Shut Up and Dance by Walk the Moon. You may already have that on your playlist, but it's mine.
I may, but I'll add it again because I have multiple volumes. I love that song. All right, how about a quote or a mantra that inspires me that I love to share?
So this is something that's been with me for many, many years. When I was a Spanish major in college, I learned this poem by Antonio Machado, and I'll just read you one of the lines. And this is I actually have a tattoo with a piece of this on it. It's Caminante no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. And what that means in English is, not as beautifully said, traveler, there is no path. You make the path as you walk.
How fitting for what you do. Okay, how about a resource? It can be anything, a book, an app, you name it, simply that's made my life better.
This is a book that I keep buying and giving away. So I actually don't have one on my shelf right now, and I've been doing it for 20 years. I first read this in graduate school. It's called Transitions by William Bridges. And it's a very simple, very digestible book. I probably read it once a year about change. And it's a very simple model. It starts with the end, the neutral zone, and the beginning. And it's kind of like the stages of grief. It's not linear, it's not formulaic, but it just, wherever you are in any sort of personal or business, it applies to businesses, it applies to personal change. Wherever you are in any sort of transition, it serves you. It meets you where you are. I always find a different nugget every year when I read it. It's just the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, I'll be sure to add that to the favorites page of my website so we can all find it. I will definitely check that out. Okay, and last but definitely not least, what are you grateful for today, Laura?
I'm always grateful for this, but I'm especially grateful today for being an aunt. I went through a long journey of whether or not just to decide to be a mother, and I chose not to. And part of the reason that I chose not to be a mother, for many, many reasons, which is a whole other podcast, is because I was so beautifully surprised by my role as an aunt and how fulfilled I was. The part of me that wanted to be a mom is so deeply fulfilled in my role as an aunt with my niece and nephew. It's such a beautiful surprise in my life. And they just started school and we've been having some precious conversations. And so I'm just deeply grateful for those two being in my life in a unique way.
I love that. And I know personally for myself, for my own kiddos, how important it is, aunts and uncles. It's a very special relationship. So I am certainly grateful for all of them. And I'm grateful for you that we connected and that you've joined me here today, shining your light so brightly in this world and sharing it with us. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much. I always get something out of our conversations, and today was no different. So thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.